Geeks! I feel like there's no week without news related to Peleton. I swear I talk about this bike just as much as I talk about Russia. In the new Sex and the City reboot, Mr. Big dies from a heart attack after riding his Peleton. Now, Peleton paid for that appearance, but now another show on Showtime called Billions also featured a character having a heart attack on a Peleton, and now the company's pissed. So I'm gonna go out and say that having a heart attack on these bikes should not be your first concern. It should be that they break your crutch. Before we get started, please hit that subscribe button below and like this video. Things in Russia and Ukraine continue to heat up, leaving us all wondering if we're on the precipice of war. Russia has over 100,000 troops and tanks along the border with Ukraine, and they evacuated the families of diplomats out of there. The US says Russia has sent operatives into Ukraine to create trouble, to then give Russia a reason to invade. So hypothetically, a few mercenaries could go in there and attack pro-Russia Ukrainian rebels, which would allow Russia to say they need to go in to save the day. And the UK says they saw gloomy intelligence suggesting that Russia is planning a lightning raid on Ukraine's capital and that Putin has chosen a pro-Russia leader for the country. Now you can tell the US is worried about a possible invasion because they also ordered the relatives of their embassy staff to leave the country and have urged US citizens there to do the same. Now people on the ground in Ukraine say things there are as business as usual, and Putin denies he's planning an invasion. In fact, his narrative inside Russia is that he's defending against increasing threats from NATO, not causing them. Нет, we are not invading. Okay, this is who we want to lead Ukraine? He looked good to me. Okay. The US is trying to show a united front with European leaders and NATO, and they say that if there's a Russian incursion into Ukraine, they'll respond with unprecedented sanctions. But we also know that Europe isn't really united on that idea, because if sanctions hit Russia's gas industry, which would be the toughest of sanctions, then it would backfire on them since they purchase Russian gas. And by the way, if the Europeans have to import gas from elsewhere, then that's going to increase prices all over the world. You ready for that? President Biden announced he put 8,500 troops in Eastern Europe, not in Ukraine, on alert in case something happens, and has sent $200 million worth of weapons to Ukraine's military. Other European countries and NATO will also be sending weapons and military equipment there to help Ukraine beef up their defenses. So safe to say, things look pretty scary. I asked you all if you thought war was imminent, and 62% of you said yes, which I actually thought was a relief, because I agree that while it could go either way, war is not a guarantee. Here's my hot take. The dangerous part is you have so much tension in that corner of the world that any one mistake could be the match that lights the whole thing on fire. But on the other side, if you take a step back, as irrational as Putin seems, there are some things that could legitimately hold him back and prevent a full-scale war, even if some clashes do happen. Taking over Ukraine for Putin would be a very expensive endeavor, especially for a country that is economically suffering so much. So how do we end this thing? At the moment, we and the Europeans have stood hard against Putin's demands that NATO not expand further into Eastern Europe or accept Ukraine as a member. But from a negotiating standpoint, Putin has us where he wants us, and that's a bit embarrassing. We need to flip this on its head by projecting enough financial and military strength and unity with our partners that Putin stops in his tracks. But we're still not there yet. Houthi rebels in Yemen targeted the US Airbase in the UAE, along with some other sites, by launching ballistic missiles, which the US military and the UAE luckily intercepted. This is the second Houthi attack in a week against the UAE, and these attacks are serious business. First ones hit the Abu Dhabi airport and a major fuel depot, which killed 3 people there, and then this week's attack caused 2,000 US troops to shelter in bunkers. The US military also returned fire by launching Patriot missiles back at the Houthis. This is all happening right now because the Saudi-led coalition has increased its attacks in Yemen. First, a quick recap. In 2014, the Saudi government decided to lead a coalition, which includes the UAE and the US, to fight Houthi rebels in Yemen, which are backed by Iran. The rebels had seized control over the country's capital and were posing numerous threats to the country, to Saudi Arabia, which neighbors Yemen, and to the entire region. Now, the US doesn't fight in this war, but we give intelligence and technical assistance, and we sell arms to the Saudis. This has been a political hot potato for every US president since President Obama joined this coalition. So recently, the Saudis pursued punishing airstrikes in Yemen, and they targeted a prison which ended up killing over 80 people there. So the Houthi attacks against the UAE were meant to be in revenge for the Saudi attack, and a message that they'll continue if the UAE doesn't make the attack stop. The UAE does not want to be perceived as unsafe, since their economy depends on tourism and foreigners living, working, and investing there. Now, as shitty as the Saudi military is, the Houthis are straight up terrorists. And so the US has now said it might finally designate Houthi rebels as a terrorist organization. This is not a case where either side is good, but President Biden promised to end US support for the Saudi coalition's war against Houthi rebels last year. And 1 year in, not much has changed. Instead of fueling the fire, we need to be focused on a strategy that weakens the Houthi rebels while pushing for a real diplomatic solution to bring this war to an end. This is a fascinating story, and I'm not just covering it because it's fun to say Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso. The military in Burkina Faso has overthrown democratically elected President Kabore. Kabore was elected in 2015, but faced a lot of growing criticism from his people because his government was unable to counter Islamic terrorist attacks that have destabilized the country, displaced 1.4 million people, and caused thousands of deaths, including 2,000 last year alone. So the military decides they need to act on the people's dissatisfaction with their president. And so they capture the guy, suspend the constitution, and announce the government's been dissolved. Here are the 2 reasons why you should care. Believe it or not, you've invested in Burkina Faso. Yep. The United States has poured millions of dollars into training and equipping the military there to fight these Islamist terrorists, but unfortunately it's yielded little results. And the reason is because the insurgency there is really strong. And where did those insurgents come from? Mostly Libya. After the government in Libya collapsed in 2011 and we helped get rid of its leader, Muammar Gaddafi, who, let's be clear, was a genocidal criminal consistently high on cocaine, terrorist groups in Libya spread across Western Africa to countries like Burkina Faso and destabilized the whole area. The second reason you should care is there have been a string of coups in Africa over the past year. Since the beginning of 2021, there have been coups in Mali, Guinea, Sudan, Chad, and now Burkina Faso. So why are military takeovers trendy now? One leading theory is that the way the international community has reacted to coups or takeovers in the region has changed. And a lot of that seems to be influenced by how the US in particular publicly reacted to military takeovers in Egypt in 2013 and in Zimbabwe in 2017. When the leaders there were overthrown, we publicly declined to call them coups because those leaders were assholes and we were happy to see them go. Which, geek out with me for a second here, underscores the main point we make at Oh My World all the time, which is that what we do here matters very much abroad. I'd add one more piece to this, which is that ultimately these countries suffer from corruption, repression, and political elites who don't serve their people. So when you have dysfunctional governments like that, even if they're democratic, people lose faith in the system and they resort to coups because they feel it's the best way to change things on the ground. Did you know our military was just supporting a battle against ISIS in Syria this week? If you didn't know, it's not your fault, since the coverage of this has been abysmal. ISIS took over a prison in Syria where 3,000 of its fighters are jailed. And they took hundreds of boys there as young as 12 years old as hostages to use as human shields. I mean, this was a horrific situation. Just so you have some background on this prison, it's located in northeast Syria in an area that used to be under ISIS's control. And the reason you have all these children there is because they were either born there during ISIS's reign, or their parents who came from foreign countries who wanted to join ISIS brought them there with them. And now they've just kind of been abandoned there, since a lot of foreign countries don't want to take back their citizens who joined ISIS. But it's not that easy to just take their kids without the parents. I'm telling you, it's a real shitburger. So ISIS mounts this military offensive to take over this prison and release its fighters. And our military got in there to support the Kurdish forces on the ground in charge of the prison by conducting airstrikes. And after 4 days of airstrikes, our ground troops had to step in to back the forces fighting ISIS there. Luckily, the Kurdish forces just won the battle and regained control over the prison, which is a relief since ISIS had threatened to kill all the miners if they continued to be under attack. The thing that's so heartbreaking about this, in addition to the entire story around these young kids, is that it's reflective of ISIS's staying power, and that we have to stay on top of this threat before we can feel like it's gone. The United States and a coalition of global partners, including Kurdish-led forces, pretty much crushed ISIS in Syria back in 2019, when we defeated what was known as the Caliphate. But it was always a risk that they could reappear, and so I'm glad the US moved super fast to crush this situation. But I hate that we're even talking about ISIS in Syria again, and that they're using their same disgusting tactics to threaten children. For this week, and forever for years to come, ISIS will be on my list. A woman with incurable cancer named Kat Cordner and her 2 teammates, Abby and Charlotte, have broken the world record for rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. Let's just take a step back here, since it's easy for me to say that, but actually wrap your mind around that. They rowed a tiny kayaky looking thing called the Dolly Parton across the world's 2nd largest ocean. They went from the Canary Islands to the English Harbor, which is 3,000 miles, and they did it in 42 days. And it's not like they just got lucky. They faced scorching heat, enormous nighttime waves. I literally sweat thinking about this. And they suffered from sleep deprivation, blisters and calluses, and sharks trailing their tiny boat. But they also looked like they had fun along the way. The most inspirational part is that Kat has secondary ovarian cancer and has been told by doctors that she doesn't have decades, but years left to live. So she said she wants to make the most of them and do things that are challenging and fun. The rowers hope to raise 100,000 British pounds to be donated toward cancer research. So if you're interested in donating, go to their webpage, weareextraordinary.com, to support their cause. Thanks, geeks! If you liked today's show, then please click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and TikTok for more political satire. And finally, if there's anything in particular you want me to cover, reach out to me on social media and I'll obviously give you a shout out. Stay fabulous, geeks.